Today's episode covers a topic that can feel heavy, but it's one that we need to talk about more openly. Suicide and how we can help prevent it, the support that is available, and the important point that nobody is at fault in these situations. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this conversation may be difficult for some viewers. If you've been personally impacted by suicide, struggled with suicidal thoughts, or are supporting someone who has, please take good care of yourself as you watch. It's okay to pause, skip, or come back when you feel ready. Important thing is that we want to get across in today's podcast is that help is available and nobody is at fault. The goal of today's podcast is to bring understanding, reduce stigma, and talk about what can help. Suicide is complex, but it's also preventable, and prevention can start with awareness, connection, and some tips on how to respond. I'm very honoured today to be joined by the chair of the Consortium for Suicide Prevention, Ian Dyson, CBE, QPM, DL. Together, we will talk about the practical steps individuals and communities can take to make a difference. You are not alone. Help is available. Conversations like this matter. Let's begin. Hello and welcome back to Alison McQuinney podcast, where we have conversations about business and wellbeing success. And we've got a strong emphasis today on wellbeing. We're going to be talking about a very important topic on suicide prevention. And I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast today Ian Dyson. Ian retired in 2022 after 38 years as a police officer, ending his career as the Commissioner of the City of London Police. During his time in the city, particularly during the COVID period, Ian was struck by the significant increase in people taking their lives or trying to take their lives from the bridges across the Thames. He was concerned at the youth of many of these people, and his further research into the subject revealed two things. Firstly, the scale of the challenge of mental health amongst our communities, and secondly, that there are things we can do. When Ian was asked to become chair of a newly formed charity, the Consortium of the Prevention of Suicide, he didn't hesitate to accept. His mission is to get as many people as possible to join the conversation and talk about this often unspoken tragedy. Now, Ian himself will say that he's not a medical professional, and it's important we make that clear, but there's still a lot of conversation that we can have that I think will be very helpful to people watching this podcast. So, Ian, a very warm welcome to the podcast. And first of all, could we talk about the Consortium for the Prevention of Suicide? Tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, Alison. And thank you for inviting me on this podcast. So the consortium started probably about 4 or 5 years ago by an incredibly energetic young woman called Vicky Vidler, who worked within the security sector. She was actually in the Bank of England at the time. And sadly, her brother took his own life. And from that tragedy came a determination to do something about it, because as you said in your introduction, there are things we can do. So she galvanized the industry and created the consortium as really to start with, and I don't say this in a pejorative sense, but as a sort of one-woman show, and it was her energy and drive. And she got a lot of support in the industry. But then there reached a point where she realised that it needed to be put on a more sort of sustainable footing. So it became a registered charity. And that's when she invited me to be chair, which I was delighted to be. I didn't know Vicky much before then, but she'd heard of me, and I think she'd heard me speak and thought, here's somebody who could help take the charity forward. It is, I should say, it started and it probably remains to this day focused around the security sector, but not exclusively. The reality is that, you know, the support and the advice and everything applies across all sectors. But the security sector is a high risk sector for a number of reasons. There are lots of men between the ages of 30 and 50 employed in the security sector, and they are a high risk group because of a number of factors. They recruit a lot of ex-service people. In a survey that the University of Portsmouth did some years ago, they estimated 49%, so almost half of the people they interviewed had undiagnosed PTSD. Long hours, often lowly paid, unsociable hours, and also in some of the sectors, particularly people like door security, you're faced with conflict. And all of these factors meant that, you know, the sector is a high risk one. But and so that's how we started, and we now are growing. We've got a great board of trustees. We are, you know, we're a small charity still, and we've managed to get support from some of the big players in the security industry. But we're still small. But we've got a website now which has resources and where people can go to. What we want to be is the go-to place that people can go to get advice and support. A lot of it is about, we're not a charity that will deal with individual cases. That's not within our purview. But it is about saying to companies, to organizations, you know, are you doing enough? How can you do more? Challenge them. And, you know, our theme of we have a conference every year in September, and our theme is normally something like start the conversation or have the conversation, because as probably a theme throughout this podcast will be, talking. It's good to talk.
And it's funny because in the time between me first approaching you about this and actually getting to today, I had two people I know come to me saying that they were worried about a close relative because they were suicidal. And I was able to say to them, I know just the website you need to look at, go to this. And I directed them to you. And their feedback was, oh, this is just so helpful.
Brilliant.
You know, because it gives you details of other organizations as well. And it just really helped them to make progress in what they were having to deal with. So it's incredibly useful. And I do strongly recommend people do look at the website.
Super.
From your perspective, at the Consortium for Suicide Prevention, what are the biggest misconceptions people have about suicide?
I think there is a fear about it. You know, I said at the outset, I'm not an expert, and I think that inhibits a lot of people from thinking, gosh, I don't know what to do. If somebody, you know, that they know of, a relative, is starting to sort of show those signs maybe, or talking in a way, I think fear is a big factor. People step away, and that's the whole point that we want to say is, don't step away. Talking about it is the single most important thing people can do. One of the interesting pieces that came out of academic research that has been done by a number of academics who specialize in this field was, a lot of people who take their own life, actually they don't believe want to take their life. I think that's probably the single biggest misconception. And this was research done with talking to lots of people who had attempted and not succeeded in taking their own life. So they were interviewed about what was going through their minds. And then that coupled with the research which looked at video clips of people who had, for example, jumped in front of a train, and there's this hesitation.
Mm-hmm.
And the conclusion of the research is that it's not about a conscious decision to take your own life. It is a way of escaping from all the things that are overpowering you. That it's a series of problems that seem absolutely insurmountable, and the only way out is to just, run. We all have sometimes. I'm sure we've all experienced that feeling of lots of things happening, and all I'm going to just go into my room and shut the door and just sit on my own. It's that sort of flight bit taken to the extreme, and I think therefore that's part of the root of us understanding how we can help, we as individuals, because you're not necessarily trying to stop someone trying to take their life. What you're trying to do is help them understand that their problems are solvable, or at least livable with. There's a fascinating, and I forget his name, but an American guy who wrote a book about his experience. He jumped off the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, and he survived miraculously. And he wrote a passage, and I'm going to slightly misquote it, so apologies, but you'll get the sentiment. He says in his book, "The moment I let go of the railings, I realized that there was a solution to all of my problems, except for the fact that I'd let go of the railings." And now, fortunately, he survived. But that's the power of that statement, is that there is this sense of this is the only way out. I'm going to, take my life. But actually, oh my God, am I? And that's why you see a hesitation. Now, that's not in every case, but that's a significant part of trying to understand the solution. Talking to people and saying, look, there is a way. There is a way to this. We'll work this through, and try and get people to just talk about what they're feeling, rather than don't do it, don't jump. That's a sort of, it's a negative. The phrase that one academic said was, approach anyone that you're concerned about with an open heart. I think that's a lovely phrase.
Yes,
it's about
is.
non-judgment. It's about accepting. It's about almost like a peace. And I think that's a really important element of it as well.
I think it's really important for people to have channels to talk about these things.
Absolutely.
And show their emotions as well, cry if they need to. Going way back, my father passed when I was fairly young.
Right.
And I can remember 4 months after the death, I went to my doctor because I felt down all the time, which isn't me. And I was worried about that. And what he said to me in that one session changed my life, changed my perspective, because he said, what you are feeling is perfectly normal. And I would be worried about you if you weren't feeling this.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm not giving you any drugs or anything to make you happy. You need to go home and be miserable and cry it out and talk it out, and you will get through it. And gradually the good days start to become more frequent against the bad days, but it's a gradual process. And the way he explained things to me, no explanation ever been given before. So I kind of thought, oh, this isn't normal. I'm not well. I need to go to a doctor. And it just gave me a sense of peace.
Alison, that is so important. It's why men between the age of 30 and 50 are such a high risk group, because we don't talk about our emotions and our feelings. And there are lots of lads groups, they call them, or men's groups across the country, who they are the most amazing resource, because they do get men to talk. And I listened to a talk by a guy who had gone to one, and he talked about his journey and how he had been at the very, very edge of despair and wanting to end his life. And he went to this group, and for the first few weeks, all they talked about was kind of, do they prefer tea or coffee, or do they, do you put milk in the cup before the tea, and all that sort of nonsense. and then you start to get into the conversations about how you're feeling. It takes time, but they're really, really important just to talk. There is also research that shows that on some of the, in areas where we know there are locations that have an attraction for people who wish to take their life, simple things like a bench on the approach to a bridge can have a real impact, because people would just, I'll sit down here for a minute. And that's either a chance for them to reflect, or it's a chance for somebody to come with an open heart and say, hi, you okay? And just chat.
For people close to people who might be considering suicide, are there any signs that they should be watching out for?
So again, listening to one of the academic researchers into this, she said and would say, you cannot predict it. You cannot predict it. And one of the challenges for people, particularly family and close relatives or partners, is they feel a huge guilt. Why didn't I know? Why? And the academic was like, you can't know, because people can display any number of signs, whether it be slightly withdrawn, not eating, not sleeping, all of these things, and thinking of taking their own life is nowhere near their thinking. Other people might be perfectly sort of on the surface quite normal, but actually things are building up inside. There was a great little video clip made by a charity, and I forget the name, apologies, but it was on YouTube, and it was of two men at a football match, and it sort of just shows little clips of a succession of obviously every week at the football, and they're sitting next to each other, and one guy is really quiet and the other guy is sort of cheering, and he's got all the flags and he's got the t-shirt and he's going, hi, how you doing, you great, you all right, you're quiet today. And this goes on for a series, and then the last clip is the empty seat is the vivacious, energetic guy, and there's like a little bunch of flowers on his seat. And the point was, the quiet, withdrawn person who didn't say anything was not the person that then and so I think it's hard to say, are there signs that would indicate that somebody may take their own life? But I think abnormality, if you're normally somebody who's life and soul of the party and then you're not, there's clearly, it's a conversation. That could be a really simple thing, might not be, but the point is you're still helping that person. And that's why I think this sort of approaching somebody with an open heart means not judging, not concluding,
yes,
not shutting down, not being negative. It's that open welcoming. And you don't know where you're going to go with that. You could find that somebody who you're really worried about, actually what they're most worried about is their son or daughter is taking their exams, and they think they're going to, it could be something quite sort of different. So I think it's about approaching with an open heart. If you think it's out of the normal, I think there's not obvious signs, because everyone's different, and some people will suppress a lot of it. So it's just looking, is there something that is making me think that something's not quite the same? Here's another thing that sort of really took me by surprise. In some of the other academic research that was done, 70% of the sort of sample, if you like, of people who had taken their own life or attempted to take their own life, 70% of the people in that survey had not seen a health practitioner, either for physical or for mental health issues. 70%. So so again, another academic said it's not a mental health issue, it's a personal, it's a human issue. And I think I think that's just about us being part of society and part of community, and just thinking, is something not right?
And
I,
holding the space for them
yeah,
to
and not.
talk.
I think that's the thing, and I think when you start, I think I mentioned earlier on, there's a fear, isn't there? People think, oh my gosh, how am I going to cope? I'm not. If somebody says I'm really down, I'm thinking of ending it all. Can I cope with it?
Mm,
And I think that I think there's a really important thing to say. Don't take on your shoulders
mm,
the responsibility for that person, and that's really hard, particularly if it's a loved one or a
mm,
relative. But I think that's where the guilt comes in. I should have known, I could have done more. Actually, the most important thing is to have the conversation and start to try and get that person to start to identify the solution to the problems that are overwhelming them, really. And I think it's a challenge for us all, but I
mm.
think it's a challenge of, we're all social animals, aren't we? And the art of conversation, just talking to
Mm.
people, chatting, um, and just simple acts. I was on the tube the other day, and there was a young woman, and she was clearly upset. She'd been looking at her phone, and she started just sniffling and crying a little bit. And there was a man opposite, and he just got a tissue and just handed it to her, and it was just a really, really simple act.
Mm.
And I thought that meant a lot to that young woman.
Of course,
And
yes.
she said thank you, and but it was, again, it's that point of, we're here, we're open heart,
Mm,
we're here, you're not alone. That's the
mm.
thing. So many people feel they're on their own, and we can be, if we live in a world of just online. That's why COVID was so damaging for
Yeah,
lots of people. You do tend to feel, I'm the only one in this world, I've got all these problems and nobody can solve them for me. And sometimes it's just somebody saying, well, what are the problems? What, maybe we can, how are you going to solve that?
and quite often it can be a team effort because
Mm,
one of the things I do is I'm a healer, and as part of that, sometimes people who come to see me may be feeling extremely down because they're ill, and that can be caused by the illness, or it can be affected by drugs even. But I try to have a conversation over who else is in their life that they can go to for support, and hopefully they will go to several. And that would always include the doctor, by the way, because
yeah,
doctors are really great at this sort of situation. And to really sort of showcase to them that actually they have got a network of support and
yes,
they're not on their own. And yes, they can still come to me and talk about it. I would not stop that. But actually, there's a whole group of us who can support them.
yeah,
And in that conversation, I try to identify who those people might be.
right, right. Well, I mean, I think that's absolutely spot on. We're not alone. And loneliness is a factor in what we're
Mm,
talking about, and actually people can feel very alone and very lonely, even when they have a network around them, and it's just making sure that they can see that actually that network is there for them.
mm,
um, and it can be very simple things. I many years ago, about 10 years ago, there was a sort of I had a family issue, which was, thankfully, came out all right in the end. But I thought I was going to lose a very close family member, and we had lots of support around us as a family, from neighbours and friends and all that. And I've got a very old dear friend of mine who I've known since school, and he's not somebody taken to emotion. He's quite sort of, um, almost straight laced, I would say. But I always remember about this. We had lots of people offering support, driving to the hospital, all of that sort of thing. And this friend of mine, he lived a bit away, but he didn't do any of that. But he said to me, let's meet for a coffee. And I was saying, yeah, okay. And, I was sort of trying to find, because my head was just full of everything, but I always remember he was just in his messages. He was just, no, we're going to meet. We're going to meet. I'm going to be there. I'll see you there. And he wouldn't take no for an answer. And we did meet. And he just said, okay, talk to me. That's all he said. And it was brilliant because I just unloaded.
Mm.
And I think what did that friend do? He simply made sure that I spoke to him.
Yeah.
And when I did speak to him, he just let me talk.
Yeah.
And it was what I needed.
Yeah.
And
So I
it's as
think
simple
sometimes
as that.
people are worried about saying the wrong thing, aren't they? But actually,
Yes,
it's as simple as that. Right, talk to me.
absolutely.
How are
Just
you?
talk to me. Yeah,
Yeah.
just tell me how you're feeling. And, oh, you're feeling rubbish. Well, great. Okay, why? Why? Let's talk. And I think the other thing that I think can be an inhibitor is, and you can see this sometimes when I can see it talking to people, that they're frantic, their brain is racing to find a solution. And, it's that thing I said earlier, don't take on the responsibility.
Mm.
So, just again, that beautiful phrase, open heart, talk to me, just
Mm.
talk to me. And right, okay, so you've listed a load of things that are on your mind and causing you trouble. Okay, well, let's take the first one. So what are you thinking of doing about that? And sort of just help them think through, rather than thinking, right, this is what you've got to do. You've got to go here, there, and everywhere. It's a subtle difference, but it's actually about, because that's how, by helping the individual to find the solutions, is the way to get them away from that sort of literal and metaphorical cliff edge.
There's a phrase that I really like. I don't know where it originates from, but it's quite a well-known phrase that it's okay to not be okay.
Absolutely, it's okay to not be okay is it's a really good phrase.
Yeah. And I
And
think particularly these days where you've got social media
yeah,
and academic pressures, if you're of a certain age where you're going through academia, um, everybody puts on their showcase reel on social
yeah,
media by and large. And I think that if you are going through something, it could be very easy to compare yourself to people who are putting on a very good social um, reel
mm,
and sort of think, oh, their life is perfect and I'm
mm.
not, and compare. And actually, that in itself, the sort of fun and games on social media could also be hiding heartache in the background. It's not necessarily the full picture.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That's a shadow to mask everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, gosh, I guessed we would cover social media at some stage, Alison. It is, oh, it's, I don't know where to start with it, really. It's toxic. A friend of mine, his daughter, um, just became almost fixated with plastic surgery. And it was because she'd posted a picture of herself on holiday when she was only about 19, 20. And a couple of people commented and just said, oh, you look a bit fat.
Oh
And
dear.
it just, I mean, just awful, awful. And I think people, I won't speak for you, but people of my generation, me, I'll talk for me. How do I deal with social media? Well, I just don't go on it, and I think our generation can't understand sometimes why that's not going to work for young people. They can't. That's like saying to our generation, well, you're going to have to do without your car and your telephone, and whoa, hold on a minute. And so it's kind of, the genie is out the bottle, isn't it? And it's just, how can you counter this this just tsunami of hate and shaming, and it's
Mm.
really, really tricky and hard. And good luck to the legislators for trying to regulate it. But I think we have to acknowledge that social media has a very, very powerful role in making young people feel bad about themselves,
Mm.
bluntly. And look at this guy, that was this Canadian that was convicted of supplying drugs in order to facilitate suicide of people in the UK. I mean, it's just awful that that can go on. And I don't, I sort of slight apology to listeners. I don't have an answer to the social media piece. I think it's the listening with an open heart, and then people will say, and these people said this on TikTok or Instagram about me and all this, and it's then you have the conversation about, well, who are these people and what value are their comments to you? Why are they important to you? And just try and understand that there are haters out there and they're not worthy. And it's hard, because if you've got somebody whose self-image is quite fragile, these are really, really incredibly damaging comments that perhaps other people might just brush off. But
I think we can all feel hurt when a nasty comment is hurled in our direction, and we've all been there. And I think that it's important sometimes to stand back and critically evaluate it, because there's cases where criticism is helpful because it helps advance you, and where this is clearly not that case. I think it's often a reflection of the person serving that dish rather than you.
Yes,
It's a
absolutely.
reflection of where they are. And I think it's important to remember that. Still block them by all means. You don't need to put up with that. But it's a reflection of who they are and where they are.
Yes. I think this whole the self-confidence issue for young people is, and it's not, I don't blame young people. I don't say that they're a different, they're a sort of woker generation than ours. We didn't have that to contend with. It's a really, really tricky environment for them all, because they're just exposed to it the whole time. So and of course for many people, young and old, but mainly younger, that is their social life. We've I don't think our generation, my generation, has experienced a sort of a position where your whole social life is online. That is something really new.
It is. I mean, I'm so glad social media wasn't around when I was young, and I made any mistakes I made offline.
Yes.
And I think also when it's on social media and you've got this record, when you make mistakes, that shouldn't be a ball and chain around your ankle for the rest of your life. If you learn from the mistake, you can grow from it.
Absolutely.
And that's how it should be viewed. And when you're young, you're going to make mistakes because you're learning.
I think it's really tricky. I mean, my children are all in their sort of late 20s, early 30s now. And like everyone, nobody tells you how to be a parent, but I think what would I say to anyone who's concerned about their child being online? I think it's about some fundamentals about trust that mean you can have if you have that sort of basic respect and trust between yourself and your children that isn't judgmental, you can have a conversation that starts to explain and tell you what they're doing online. I think if you're a sort of parent, and this sounds very, very sanctimonious, because I was not a perfect parent, but if you're a parent who says, oh, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that, children are children. They're gonna just conceal everything, aren't they?
Yeah.
But if you're the sort of parent, and I mean, it's really interesting. It's not a direct comparison, but as a police officer, I remember having the conversation with my children about drugs. Because there was not only the sort of harm to themselves, but it could have been potentially difficult for me and my career.
Of course.
So I had the honest conversation with them about it, and said, you might be tempted to experiment, but please respect me and my position. And we had a sort of a more fuller argument about it. And I don't know everything that my kids got up to, but I think they respected my position. They never posted anything on social media that would embarrass me or anything like that. Now that's not, we're in a volume and a scale and an intensity of social media and online stuff now, which is very different to those sort of days. But I think the principles are the same. Just try and respect your child as a young adult that will make mistakes, as you say, but try and be that person who, as well as their parent, is sort of has the open heart and listens. And kids will make mistakes, and how do you deal with a child who's made a mistake? Is it punishment or is it learning? And I think the more you can try and be somebody who's a guide and gives them values and a sense of right and wrong and humanity, rather than you must do this and you must do that, I think you get to a place where your child might be more able to tell you what they're doing online. Might not tell you everything, but I think you're going that extra step to be in a position where you can say, that's not a particularly nice website, and these are the reasons why. Why are you on that one?
Yeah.
But have it as a sort of mature conversation rather than well, you're not going to go on that one, you're banned from there. I think ultimately that could be a parental prerogative. But I don't know if I'm making sense, but I think
No, you are.
It's just that non-judgmental, open conversation that will start to get to the root of what's happening, rather than just completely push it aside. And my daughter worked in a school, and there was the tragedy of, I can't remember her first name, Russell was her surname, a girl who took her own life after being on social media, and her father now is quite a prominent campaigner for restriction of online activity for young people. And my daughter was teaching in a school at the time, and I remember her saying, it's as a parent, it's so important to try and get under the skin of what your child is doing online. Just keep the conversation going. That's part of your parental responsibility.
I know I was very lucky with my parents in that there was always that pathway that I had to them. If I was in a situation I wasn't happy about, or if I'd made a mistake and I wasn't sure how to correct it, that I could always go to them and say, look, I'm in a mess. Can you help me? And just be totally honest about it, even if it was my fault.
Yeah.
Just say, I've messed up. How do I deal with this?
Yeah.
And that was such a useful pathway to have, because I didn't need to hide it or anything, and I had help available to get me
Yeah.
out of whatever it was.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely, it's so valuable. I mean, sadly and tragically, a lot of young people don't have that parental support. They've disrupted families, chaotic lifestyles of parents, and all those sort of things. And so the online world is their sanctuary.
Yeah.
And that's a hard one to crack. So there has to be, in my view, sort of regulation and legislation around young people accessing the online world, to be that safety net for those that don't have those networks that you've just described.
Yeah. Now we've talked a lot about people who talk about being suicidal, or talk about being unhappy, and how you can have a conversation. There's also the situation where you can have somebody who is on the verge of committing suicide. You might find them, say, on a bridge about to jump, or on the roof of a building about to jump. And obviously that's a 999 call. But in, say, the retail industry, you will get managers, you will get security guards who have to deal with that. And in my background, I did have to deal with it. And very fortunately, the lady did not jump. But for those who, where the outcome has not been so good, what advice do you have for them in handling that? Because they're affected by that as well.
Hugely. this is where I think supportive employers are really, really important. Because in the circumstance you've described, the employer has is paying people to be doing that job where they will encounter the public. So the support of employers is really, really important. And there is now a British standard that's been recently released on organisational suicide prevention and how they can support, and the sort of best practice. And I think that's the first thing, really wrap yourself around your employee, and the message must be, we're here to support you, of course, and all the things that we've talked about before. I think then it's about going back to something I mentioned very, very early on, which is it's not your fault. Guilt for a survivor is really strong, isn't it? Why I could have saved them, could I have saved them? And the answer is, ultimately, that person chose to take that action to end their life.
Yeah.
And you tried, and we have to acknowledge that until we're in a position where every member of the population is trained in these things, you're going to just approach it in the way that you as a human being instinctively behaves. So, in the cold forensic light of day, did you say everything you could have said correctly? Probably not, but that's not important in my view. The important thing is you made an effort. But you can't ultimately take responsibility for the actions that somebody else was intending to do and chose to do. And I think that's just got to be a message that's reinforced throughout in the conversations, both as friends, family, supporters, employers, everybody. You don't take the blame for this. And that's a really hard thing. And I would encourage anyone, who's in that position, who feels really strongly still that, yeah, despite all that, I still feel deep down inside I'm responsible. There are professionals you can talk to. And it is important you do that, have the conversation. Don't bottle it up. Don't go through your life thinking, I've got this huge dark secret. Please talk to people. And then you will come, I hope, if you get that support, what that should do is start to make you realize, that, you can't take the guilt or the blame for the actions of somebody else. You were there to try and, get a different outcome, but tragically, that's not the case. And there are many examples of people who have intervened, and as a result, they have prevented someone from taking their own life. And that's to be celebrated. That's fantastic.
I mean, although the incident that I was involved in ended with this lady still living and she didn't jump,
Yep.
it was still a very shocking experience.
That's
And
horrible.
I felt very shaken by it.
Yeah.
You went into work not expecting that at all.
Yeah.
And you end up in a role that well, certainly at the time I hadn't trained for, and you felt out of your depth.
Yeah. I think so. This is where there is a lot of support now, quite bespoke, and you can see some of that on our website, as you mentioned earlier on. But there are, for example, and I've been racking my brains, but sadly I can't remember it. But there is a charity, for example, that is specifically about supporting relatives of people who've taken their own life. And I can't for life of me remember the name, but I think their link is on our page.
Lovely.
So, for people who are directly affected by it, there is support available. And there's those, what are some of those things that can help people move through this? One is it's okay to be not okay, as you said earlier, Alison. Secondly, there are people who will listen to you without judgment. And thirdly, it's kind of I'm trying to think of the words, but you're not alone. You know, there are other people who've gone through the same experience and journey that you have, and actually, you know, you can move through it. So, you know, there's positives that you can take from it, really.
We've had a really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much. As
Yeah,
we
pleasure.
come to the end of the podcast, I think a key message for someone who may be having suicidal thoughts, or the families affected by people having suicidal thoughts or having committed suicide, is that help is available, whichever
Yes.
category that you fall in,
Yes.
and it's available with an open heart to support you. Is there anything you feel I've missed in this podcast that you think is important to share?
No, I think, Alison, we've covered some of the really main points. You know, as I said, this is not about, you know, detailed medical analysis
Mm,
and prognosis. This is about us as members of a community that, you know, and those messages are really, really simple, which is, you know, if you're in that dark place, there are ways to address the problems that you think are overwhelming you.
mm,
That's the most important thing. And there are people that can help you to work through those problems that you think are overwhelming you.
yeah.
And if you're somebody who's worried about somebody else, or encounters somebody who's in a dark place, then it's that open heart listening, and again saying to them there are ways through this,
Mm,
you know, and if we can just get those simple messages, because, you know, as we all know, tragically, to take your life is final,
yeah.
and there's no sort of, and this is why, for me, the Golden Gate Bridge jumper is so powerful. You know, I let go and I realized actually there's a solution to all this, except for the fact I'm falling
Mm,
off the bridge, and that is the most important. That's, if the more we can get people to who are in that slightly hesitant, unsure bit, but this seems to be the only way out, the more we can get to those people, then we can significantly reduce the number of people who take their life.
thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure, Alison. It's been great talking to you,
And
and
you.
thank you for listening.